you wouldn't invite 4 website designers to build you a website and then at the end of it, pay the one that you like the most and the other 3 can just get lost. Or say to the other 3, thanks a lot, I've gone with somebody else, but I'll be in touch next time I'm looking for a website. Imagine that. Welcome to another episode of our podcast. My name is Andy Simpson, CEO and co-founder at Hinterview. Today, I'm joined by Ben Musgrave, our Chief Operating Officer, and I'm looking forward to spending a bit of time with Ben talking about his background before recruitment, which I think he's got a really interesting kind of, story, how he fell into the recruitment industry and all of the different things that he's done, in between and since then. So Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
We normally start these episodes by asking our guests to tell us a little bit about their genesis story. So, where they came from. You've got a more interesting story, a more storied history than most. So yeah, I'd love to hear from where did it all begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think typical fell into recruitment. So I did chemistry at uni. Loads of my friends had a gap year.
I think you've got to go back a bit further. I think there's a more interesting chapter than that. So you've got to give the people what they want.
Okay, so my dad worked for BP, so we moved all over the world when I was a kid. So spent my teenage years in the US, in Alaska. So was graduated from American high school, prom, graduation, all those types of things. But had applied to come back to the UK to university. So came back to study chemistry. Loads of my friends at uni had a gap year, so I thought, I'll go and do that. So ended up having 5 of them.
And what were you doing? What were you doing that was so interesting that it took you about 5 times?
Skiing. Yeah. So yeah, winters out in the Alps.
Which I guess you picked up in Alaska originally.
Well, I picked up before that because my parents, before I was born, had lived in Norway, so they'd got into skiing there. So
obviously in the oil game.
Yeah. So we'd always skied, and then definitely in Alaska. A bit of everything like snowboarding, alpine skiing, telemark skiing, cross-country skiing, backcountry skiing, kind of anything on snow I was interested in. Yeah, moved back from the Alps. I'd kind of had enough living out there, kind of living out of a suitcase permanently and things. Moved back to the UK, moved to London, needed to find a job, started applying to jobs, and then got approached by some recruitment companies and was kind of learning about it, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but fundamentally I needed cash, so I said yes. And it's a story as old as time itself.
Well,
exactly, yeah. And but I wasn't actually. I guess I wasn't actually a recruiter. I was a relationship manager for a recruitment company, and so I was really looking after our big clients, and it was a lot of the big banks where we were on the PSL. For like tech PSLs, risk PSLs, finance PSLs, whatever. So, in general, we were already on them, and I was maintaining those relationships, making sure we stayed on the PSL each year, and trying to, I guess, convince the client that we were doing a good job so they'd keep us, that we were staying within their rules, and also pushing our recruiters to fill as many jobs as possible. And the reality was kind of push those rules to the limits to try and get an advantage over everyone else on the PSL. And, there's a lot of jobs come out of them, but therefore there's a lot of people on the PSL. So there's 5 or 6 companies.
Yeah.
And that was really interesting. I loved just learning about all of these different jobs that up until that time didn't even know they existed, that risk was such a thing, that, learning about different types of engineering and coding, etc. I found that really interesting. But what I really struggled with was, like, how do we pitch ourselves? Because, I was being told, we need to, let's see if we can pitch to get some more work out of these guys. Can we get on some more PSLs? Why should we stay on the PSLs? Oh, well, it's because we've got this incredible database of candidates, because we're specialists. We just do tech in finance, but we also do risk in finance, and we also do, we also do quants in finance.
Yeah.
And our guys are niche; they only work their niche. And I was like, okay, but I think everyone else on the PSL is saying exactly the same thing. So I don't even think it's a unique combination of things that we have. Never mind none of them being unique.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I really struggled with that. And then I left and I went on to worked in consultancy. So I worked in a data and analytics consultancy in sales there, and moved on to another consultancy. But I think kept in touch with you. By that point, you had your own recruitment consultancy. So I actually used you
That's right,
to recruit people for us. But I couldn't actually even tell you what your USP was then.
We didn't have one.
Well, yeah, I used you because of the relationship, because I knew you.
Yeah.
That I thought you were a good guy, that you wouldn't rip me off, that you would do a good job, as in you'd find decent candidates and you'd get them to me in a decent amount of time. And I only used you not because you'd negotiate an exclusive with me, but because I knew as a hiring manager, I didn't have the time to be dealing with multiple different recruiters. I just wanted to speak to one person, and I saw that as a benefit for myself.
And so maybe we'll come back to that in a minute. So you've obviously worked as a recruiter.
Yeah.
You've then worked as a hiring manager in a fairly large consulting business.
Yeah.
And now you've worked as a chief product officer or COO in a software company. And so you've seen the full gamut, the whole smorgasbord of you've been on every side of the table.
And I've been recruited.
And you've been recruited, yeah, exactly. Recruited by recruiters. So in the rounds, like what's your experience been like from a, what have you learned over the years since you started in this game? And what would you say the things that stand out to you are?
I used to struggle, even when we were on a PSL with a client, of like, why should a hiring manager meet us? Why should they invest time with us? And what are we really doing to help them out? And that feels like it's got even worse, right? When you're outbound prospecting, I get probably dozens of emails a day from recruiters. I am lucky if I even skim read one a week, I reckon. So it feels like for recruiters it's getting harder. The interesting thing, right? When I used you as a recruiter, that was to find contractors that I could place as a consultancy into a client. So arguably, all we were doing there was adding 2 layers of costs in, because you were taking a margin and I was taking a margin, and then they were going on to the end client. But we added a bit more of a wrapper where we had some permanent employees. There's like overhead that provided a bit of QA to that. But really we just had more of a story around, we know this space. We can give you people that you want in this space to do big data, to do analytics, and therefore get your guys through us. And the end client didn't even ask, like, do you employ these guys? Do you not? How does it all work? They just said, yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
How much will you charge us? And we charged a day rate. So we were just adding a margin. There was no fixed price or anything like that.
Yeah.
So that was my first introduction to how the wrapper is so valuable.
Yeah.
And it's not just I'll put 10% on top of this, but it's I'm not even going to talk about what this guy's being paid. I'll just tell you that the hour fee is $1,000 a day for this guy or whatever it is.
Yeah. And that's really interesting, right? Because in an earlier episode, we were talking with Sam about how the difference between being a recruitment consultancy, agency, however you wish to describe yourself, and the leap to being a consultancy, whether that be EY, Deloitte, PwC, or any of the many, many, many SMB consultancies that are out there. It's nothing more than really positioning and messaging. Okay, some people might permanently employ some people. They might have a bench of people. They might have, a few different solutions, but fundamentally, they're putting people into an organization and they're just putting a little bow on it and charging 4 times what you're charging.
Yeah.
But most importantly, what they are not in is the recruitment budget.
Yeah.
That's the key.
Yeah.
They're in a completely different budget
Yeah.
that recruitment and HR have got nothing to do with. They're having different conversations with different people who've got a lot more authority and are less focused on just cost management.
Yeah.
I think it's wild how small that gap is, or how small the step is. But for some people, it feels like, one giant leap for mankind. It feels like it's an unfathomably big step to make.
Yeah, and sometimes there is a big difference, right? And you get all of these shades of grey, and actually, it's become even more blurred. I think in the UK with all the IR35 stuff, a lot of the recruitment agencies started bringing in their like professional services consultancy, which really just proved how much of a facade a lot of that consulting work was, because suddenly they were professional services, so they were outside of IR35, but they were still just bringing day rate guys in to deliver work for the end client. And it's still paid day rate, was no fixed price stuff. There's not even a QA wrapper around it at that point, right? Where you could say, well, I do have some experts that can oversee and make sure this is going in the right direction. They're not doing that. So
yeah,
it's just that really, I think, emphasizes how little you have to do to make a big difference to justify a change in approach.
Yeah. And I think, whether you call it resource augmentation or human capital outsourcing or consulting, it is fundamentally just about helping organizations engage with on-demand talent.
Yeah.
Right. And how you do that it's not really much difference in it. It's just about how you position it to the customer.
Yeah.
And how much confidence you give the customer that you are the guys.
Yeah.
Rather than just getting a bunch of, CVs or resumes from a bunch of recruiters. So let's just talk about, your experience as a client services manager in recruitment. So you're working in a big staffing business. You've got, I would imagine, a range of blue chip accounts. You're probably competitive with X number of other, I would imagine, relatively large staffing businesses as well.
Mm-hmm.
How do the economics of that work? Do you accept your fate that you'll fill 1 in 5 jobs? And is it just part of the game that it's just a volume play and you have to accept that? Or were you trying to evolve, innovate, change, develop, win better quality business? Or are you just like, we just do what we do and that's it?
In general, we just did what we did.
Right.
Is the reality of it. And we'd have discussions around it, but it never felt like much really changed. And I think it's interesting, like for us at the time, it felt like being on the PSL was like the holy grail. Of course you want these big clients to be on the PSL because then you're protected. You've got this moat around you. Hiring managers aren't supposed to use anyone but you. So that's great. But it meant each role was hyper competitive.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't be like, hey, I've got a great relationship with this guy, so I know I'm the only one, or I get it a week ahead. Everyone on the PSL was getting that job at the same time, and you were expected to work the job. So you had to expect you're only going to fill 1 in 5, 1 in 6, because that was the process that was built around it. And so you'd play a bit of smoke and mirrors there, and you'd say, well, I do have a good relationship with this hiring manager, so he's told me he is going to have a job coming out, so I can be ready for that job to come out, but I still can't submit CVs until the job is out.
Right.
And then there'd be another job that comes out where maybe, that hiring manager has a great relationship with somebody else, so probably they've been working it before you, so there's no point in you working it. But you'd put a CV or 2 in to show, because you had to show you were doing something about it.
Right.
So you could kind of do a bit around that, but it was kind of playing at the edges, right? It was nothing fundamental to really shift how that all worked.
And how do you motivate a team of salespeople who know that they're only going to get paid, I'm trying to divide 100 by 6, 12 and a half, 18 and a half, 18.75, 1 in 6. So they know that 5/6 of their effort is a total and utter waste of time.
Yeah.
How do you motivate, inspire, and retain people where it's blindingly obvious that most of the work they do is completely pointless?
I mean, that was where I just leave people like you and, the actual managers of those people to try and motivate them. And, I think we were a large, well-established organization. We had a lot of process and insights and we knew to focus on things like, if you had a good candidate, get them multiple interviews, because again, it's unlikely you had the candidate on exclusive. So that candidate was probably speaking to other recruiters. So the more interviews you could get in, the more you'd have them blocked out and the more likely you were to place them. And then we'd target jobs with multiple interviews. Because again, if you could block out those interviews, you're not only are the numbers there, because if you get 5 first interviews, you should get 2 second interviews, you should get a placement. But also if you blocked out 5 first interviews for that manager, he doesn't have time to interview anyone else's candidates either.
Yeah.
So we were targeting things like that.
Right.
But a lot of the time I'd be frustrated because conversations would be things like, so last month you only did 1 placement and you did 100 first interviews and you got 50 second interviews. So we need you to get 2 placements this month. So that means you should be going for 200 first interviews to get 100 second interviews to get the placement. And I was just like, this is madness. Instead of just making our funnel bigger, can we not adjust the size of the funnel to say, well, what do we need to do to get these 100 first interviews to make that 100 become 2 placements or 3 placements or 4 placements?
Yeah.
But it's the kind of work smarter, not work harder.
Do you think that still goes on?
I'm sure it does. And I know it does, actually, from speaking to our sales guys and our customer success guys, where they're, as part of what we do in training our clients to use our software, but just to train them in general, is what are you doing to help the end client? And if you're helping the end client by saying, you're going to have to spend less time interviewing, you're actually saying, I'm going to get less interviews to still get the placement.
Yeah.
And often it boggles their mind. They're like, well, hold on a minute, but I need my interviews because I'm KPI'd on the number of interviews I have.
Yeah.
It's like, well, but like this, then you have to wind all the way back to, why do you have those KPIs? What's the purpose of them?
Yeah.
If the KPI is no longer fit for purpose, you need to adjust your KPI. And I know you've got stories of a client that refused to video interview a candidate because they knew that if they video interviewed them, they'd never get an interview with the client. So they didn't video interview them to get them to have an interview with the client. So they were just wasting an hour of the client's time so that they could hit their KPI.
I mean, I see it all the time, right? Where the client or the recruiter will do a video interview, realize the candidate is terrible, so they will submit their CV without the video so that they get the interview to hit a target, even though they know the candidate. They'd rather hit their target. They'd rather waste an hour of their client's time with a terrible candidate so they could hit their number.
Yeah.
And that is that's not uncommon.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's pretty widespread. Right now, look, most customers that we work, not all, but most, typically you don't buy our product and implement it effectively if you think in that way.
Yeah.
Right. Most people are trying to reimagine or just get better at what they do. But it absolutely does still occur where people will willingly waste an hour of someone else's, their customer's time in pursuit of a KPI. And look, you could argue that the client deserves it, right? The client's working with 4 agencies and, why should you do the client a favor, or whatever it might be, however you might position it. But what it is really, the client, the recruiter, and arguably most of the industry are locked in this loveless, perverse dynamic where everybody knows it's weird and it's pointless and it doesn't work. but nobody wants to break the cycle. So like everyone's like, the example I always use is, imagine that you were going to build a website. You wouldn't invite 4 website designers to build you a website, and then at the end of it, pay the one that you like the most, and the other 3 can just get lost. Yeah. Or say to the other 3, thanks a lot, I've gone with somebody else, but I'll be in touch next time I'm looking for a website. Imagine that. If somebody said that to you, you'd be like, I don't want to do that again. I've just done that once. It was terrible.
Yeah.
And we go, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I look forward to hearing from you again. and then you kind of just like when you take a step back, you realize how, it's just lunacy, right? It's total and utter lunacy. But of course, we just keep doing it over and over and over again, knowing that 1 in 6 people will buy something from us, and we're willing to sacrifice the 5 and 6.
But I think fault's maybe too strong a word. I think KPIs are there, or at least start for a very good reason. But then recruiters start thinking only about their KPIs, and they stop thinking about what's best for my customer. And therefore they stop thinking, how do I articulate my offering to this customer based on the benefits to them? And so then you get well, I'll just chuck this CV over because I think they look good on paper and I can get them an interview, and then I've hit my KPI. And that KPI is there because in general, if I get 5 high quality first interviews, I get 2 second interviews, which gets me a placement, or whatever your ratios happen to be in your industry. So the KPIs were there for a reason, but the recruiter stops thinking about why they're there and starts gaming them. And in doing that, they degrade the service they're actually delivering because they stop thinking about the client, or they're incentivized to stop thinking about the client by these KPIs. And everyone just gets into this cycle of, I need to get more out the door because I need to do more deals, or it's getting harder, so I need to get more out there to do the same number of deals. And not stopping to think, like, what am I trying to achieve here? And actually, even before what am I trying to achieve, is what is that hiring manager trying to achieve? And how can I best help them? And then how do I articulate to them how I help them and how I can help them better than anybody else?
Yeah.
And that's why when you guys created Hinterview and I heard about it, and I followed you basically from day dot before joining, because I thought, this is great. This would solve so much for me as a hiring manager, because as a hiring manager, I was basically telephone interviewing pretty much anyone whose CV got sent to me, because I don't find CVs that helpful to really understand who this person is.
Yeah.
So I needed that half-hour phone call to know, do I then invest another hour to bring them in for an interview? And I knew from being on the recruiter side that I struggled because we didn't have a single unique selling point or a unique package of selling points.
Yeah.
And this created it. So it was creating value for the hiring manager. It was creating value for the recruiter. And it should actually be a better process for the candidate as well. So the candidate should perform better, which means they're more likely to get the job that's right for them. The candidates are happier, and hiring managers are becoming more and more recruiting companies. Companies that recruit are becoming more and more bothered about the candidate experience and like their brand from a hiring point of view, as well as their brand for whatever they're actually selling. And so it just seems to be like, it works all around.
Yeah. So I worked obviously in a large staffing business, and got married, had a kid, had my first kind of midlife crisis. And decided to leave a very well paid and successful job to start an IT recruitment company, just what the world needed. And in that process, I was working on a job with a client, wasn't exclusive, so I was in like a CV race, and I sent the CV of a candidate to the job. She was amazing. She was a fantastic candidate, but she'd been out of work for a number of years raising a family. I think she'd been out of work for nearly 4 years. She'd had 2 children in quick succession, the youngest of which had gone to nursery. And I submitted it. She was great. And when you've worked in recruitment for a long time, like I had, you just know what you're doing, and you just get that kind of recruitment sixth sense that this is a candidate, this is a walk-in invoice. And I sent a CV to the client. Client rejected it, not interested, looking for somebody with more up-to-date skills and experience. And so I was like, oh, I thought you might say that. So I went back to the client. I said, look, trust me, I've been doing this job a long time. You should interview this candidate. No, not interested. And so I went back to the candidate. I said, I'm really sorry. They don't want to see you. And she was gutted. And I guess in like it was like a proper sliding doors moment, like a slight fit of petulance. I went, do you know what? I tell you what we could do. We could record a video, you and I could show it to him. Then he'll see how good you are, and he'll have to interview you. She was like, yeah, sure, why not? So we recorded a video. We used this thing, Google Hangouts on Air, it was called back then. I think it's now evolved to Google Meet, but it doesn't exist anymore. We recorded a video. We published the video to YouTube. I sent the link from YouTube to the hiring manager. And I said, look, do me a favor. Just watch 2 minutes of this video. And if you still tell me she's not the right candidate, I'll never mention her name again. And of course, lo and behold, he watches the video. He responds 15 minutes later. Oh my God, she looks great. Get her in ASAP. And we send her down for an interview and she gets an offer. And we were just like, oh my God. And then to be fair, it's him that said, why don't recruiters send videos? Like that was like super helpful. And actually, fair play to you, I probably would have missed out on that candidate. And that was really how it all began. And of course, we don't know anything about technology, right? We just thought we'd buy it in. Like we bought in, I don't know, Cube 19, CRM, phone system, SourceBreaker, whatever we were using. We just assumed that we would buy another tool in. But we didn't know anyone else that was using video. And part of the reason was there was nothing out there. So there was a bunch of different options, but nobody was really designing a product for the staffing professional. Everyone was designing a product. It's all about automation. How do we disintermediate the human being from the process? And strangely, what we were looking to do was almost the diametric opposite of that. We were looking to A, showcase the recruiter doing their thing, B, bring the best out of our candidates, not the worst. We weren't trying to screen our candidates out. We were trying to present them in a good light. And so we built the very, very first prototype of Hinterview, and we used it from there as a USP for our agency. And then some years later, we realized that there was a lot of money in software, or so we thought. And we spun it out, and we closed down our little recruitment business, and we focused on this. So yeah, that's how this whole crazy journey began.
But and if you think all like the very beginnings of that, you talked about like the sixth sense you had, and your experience in recruitment meant you knew that she was a good candidate. Pretty much every recruitment company claims they have that, and that's their differentiator. But there's no way of evidencing that to a hiring manager when you're pitching to them. They're used to everybody telling them that, whether they're a like spotty 19-year-old straight out of school who's just started recruitment, or a 40-year-old who's been doing it for 2 decades. So that you can't evidence that I have this sixth sense. So that video shows is actually just a bit of evidence to it, because if you wrote a cover letter with that candidate saying the candidate doesn't look great on paper, however, I've spoken to them and they said this, that, and the other, which just seems like they're a perfect cultural fit. They've got the drive you asked for, the X, the Y, the Z. Watch the video and you'll understand. You're actually saying, I've used my experience and I'm demonstrating that now with this video.
100%, right? So, you want top marks in maths.
Yeah.
You've got to show you're working.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's no point getting to the right answer. You've got to demonstrate how you've got there.
Yeah.
And I think that's that for me was where the root cause of the perceived lack of value would exist.
Yeah.
Right. So what would happen? I was good at recruitment, right? I was a contract recruiter, volume recruiter. I was like, all about pace. And what I would do is I'd get a job, and I would take the job spec, and then I'd say, right, I'll get some CVs to you. And then I would work sometimes till midnight. And then I would find 3 CVs and I would send them to the client, and they would arrive magically in his inbox, 3 CVs. And of course, to the client, I've had a half an hour phone call and I've just imagined 3 CVs on his desk that all look good for the job. So the client has got no respect for the amount of effort that's gone in to that process. And therefore, when I then ask them for 15 grand, for the trouble, it feels like an absolute monumental ripoff. But if you articulate to the customer what has gone into making this machine and say, well, look, Mr. Customer, I spent the last 5 years researching and understanding my industry vertical, and I can now call upon any one of X number of experts in this space, blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't really matter how it's done. But I think the relationship between perception and reality is part of the reason that the hiring manager or the client devalues the service, because it's blind. They're blind to it. Whereas if they see you doing the work, they respect the value. They go, God, that would be me. This guy's just sent me 4 video interviews, each one half an hour long. And I've been reading, and I picked 2 of the candidates that I think are a great fit. That guy's just saved me 4 hours. And I think that's the challenge that recruiters face. It's about showing their value in real life. And, it's not, I don't want to diminish it. It's not easy, right? That's why it's challenging, is because it's not easy. But we absolutely, we see that happen, time after time after time, where the recruiter finds it so hard to articulate to their customer or justify their fee, and then and then you get somebody along the road saying they'll do it for 10%.
Yeah.
And those 2 things in conjunction are a massive problem.
But I think also recruiters fall into the trap of not realizing how much effort they're putting in. And it becomes normal to them, so they don't even think to explain it to the hiring manager. Yeah, you've had a half-hour call with me. In that call, I've thought of 4 people, because I am speaking to people all day, every day. So I've thought of those 4 immediately. But B, I've then put out 4 job ads. Each one of those actually cost me 50 quid, 100 quid, whatever, to advertise. I've proactively gone out to 20 people that I thought that could be a good fit. I've screened through the 100 applicants that I got from those 4 ads that I put out there. That's taken me 10 hours to do that, to come back to you with 4 candidates. And because it's second nature, you don't think to say, this is all the effort I will be doing. And it's the unconscious competence, right?
Yeah.
I'm so good at this, I don't even have to think about it. I just do it.
Yeah.
And I can't even relate to someone not understanding I'm doing all this effort.
Yeah.
So I don't even think to explain all of the work I'm doing that I'm taking off them. Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more. But just to go back to the point you made about, when you so let's imagine you're a 10-man recruitment business or 5-person recruitment business. The founder is typically somebody with tons of experience.
Yeah.
And they say things like, oh no, my clients trust me because I know everyone in my vertical or whatever. And then you say, okay, well, but how do we grow? Because the truth is, you're only one person. So, and you can get loads of trainees in, but as we've articulated on previous episodes, the reality is that half of them won't work out. You could go and buy experience in from other recruitment companies, but let's be fair, are they really going to be that great? Maybe, maybe not. If they're doing okay in recruitment company X, are they going to do great in recruitment company Y? Maybe. So you end up in this world where you are forever the central focal point of the business, because you've got no mechanism, unless you find a cloning machine, which, you may make some money out of that. Unless you find a cloning machine, you've got no real way to grow, because that proposition that's so valuable is inherently unscalable.
Yeah.
And I think that for me is where, we talk about companies' USPs. It's almost always the founder's USP.
Yeah.
And they don't really separate it from the businesses.
Yeah.
And then we think, okay, how will you get from a 5-person business? Because I can't imagine you set the business up to have 4 employees, right? Most recruitment leaders don't leave a great, well-paid job. Some do, but not many, to start a tiny and maintain a tiny recruitment company. They generally do it because their ambition is to scale the business. And when we sort of scratch beneath the surface and say, how will you scale? They haven't really got a clue.
Yeah.
Apart from, we'll just get more clients and we'll get more recruiters and we'll fill more jobs. And that, I think, is the key problem that most recruitment leaders don't really understand they have, is that the minute you take them out of the business essentially falls apart.
Yeah. I think the other thing, for most recruiters, the most enjoyable part of the job is the recruiting. It's not the outbound prospecting. And so the more you can deliver a good service to clients, the more you get repeat clients, the more time you spend recruiting and the less time you have to spend outbound prospecting. And so if you can get yourself into a repeatable process where you're demonstrating and delivering value, and you build relationships that way, as opposed to, I'm the founder, this is my mate, I play golf with him every Friday, so he'll use us, but I can only play golf so many times a week to keep these relationships going. Then you can build that business where I have brought in these 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guys. They enjoy the job more because they're spending their time recruiting, not outbound prospecting. Now, some people do like outbound, but most people don't. So they're spending their time recruiting, which is good for them. I have happier employees, which makes them more productive. They're doing that in my repeatable, scalable way, which means the clients see the benefit and keep coming back, which means we get more word of mouth business. So we have to do less outbound, which means when we do have to do outbound, we have our repeatable, scalable process, which makes it easier to win new clients. So I'm getting 1 in 50 as opposed to 1 in 100. And so it just makes everything easier.
And that is such a well-made and a well-articulated point, because people separate winning business and then delivering the service. When I'm like, no, the reason it's so hard to win business is because you haven't really got anything to sell.
Yeah.
So therefore it's much more difficult. So new business and existing customers, they're kind of one and the same. And to that point, I was with somebody last week and they'd had like a penny drop moment. And what they were saying is that they're locked in a forever cycle of employee churn. And the reason that is so is because they don't have enough customers with quality business. So they fill about 25% of their jobs, which means they're constantly having to hunt for new business. But they spend so much time hunting for new business that they have less time to work on the jobs they have. The net result is the recruiter doesn't make enough money, or they don't make the money they possibly thought they might make in year 1 or 2. Maybe they thought they'd be making 70K and they might be making 35.
Surely they've not been quoted some ridiculous OTE.
Who would ever do that?
Yeah.
I mean, what kind of person would do that? But the recruiter, but it's not just about the money, right? It's about the experience.
Yeah.
And then they go, do you know what? This isn't really working for me. I don't really like this part of the job, but I do like this part of the job, but I can't be on with this bit, but I've got to do this bit because this bit's a bit crap. And I tell you what I'm going to do.
And if that bit, it becomes 80% of your job because you're having to do so much of it.
Exactly.
It's just not fun.
It's boring. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's horrible. And then so you end up leaving the industry. Normally people leave, and that's why people go in-house, because they say, do you know what? I love the candidate. I love the delivery piece, but I hate this new business piece. And the irony is that if they worked in a better business, they could love the whole job.
Yeah.
Because not only would they spend 80, 90% of their part servicing customers who are grateful for the solution they provide, but the 10% of new business prospecting they do, they actually have something to sell. And so it's not as hard as, hi, got any jobs? Because I've got some CVs.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that is a classic example of how, recruitment companies enter a spiral of destruction. And backwards momentum has a whole momentum of its own. And I think that's what we've seen in the last 18 months, because you start to lose a bunch of people, and then it kind of like all of a sudden people go, God, do I really want to do this anymore? And your answer sometimes is more. And that sometimes just enhances or accelerates the spiral.
Yeah.
Because asking somebody who's not motivated to do an hour of BD a day to do 4 hours, I mean, that's just not going to work.
Yeah. Someone who's been earning less because there's less placements out there, who now is now earning less and doing a worse job.
It's really difficult. And look, some people, they, when that kind of scenario occurs, they go, yeah, like I'll step up to the plate, but it's generally a temporary thing.
Yeah.
They can face it down for a period of time, but eventually the fatigue sets in.
Yeah.
I guess finally, Ben, I ask all of my guests the same question at the end of these episodes. What do you see the future of the industry being? It's what, November 2024. What lies ahead?
Look, 15 years ago, when I was working in a recruiter, LinkedIn was really on like this ridiculous upward trajectory. And there was all this chat about LinkedIn's going to take our jobs because everyone can find everyone, and why are they going to need people to search? And clearly that hasn't come to pass, because there's so much more that a recruiter does than just identify people that match a skill set. So I'm slightly wary of predicting like too far ahead. I do feel like what's happened in the last 3 or 4 years is a focus on automation to allow each person to do more. So can I have automated cadences to send stuff out to, can I automate that, make it easier to search, to find these 1,000 candidates that have the right skill set, and then email all 1,000 of them and do some basic automated screening of them, etc. And that's definitely been helpful, but it's a double-edged sword, because the more you automate and the more you can do, the more everyone is doing, the more noise there is, it makes it harder to cut through. And then we've spoken about before with the rise of AI, that it's going to be harder and harder to understand how good someone is from their CV, because they can just run it through ChatGPT or Anthropic or whoever, to really understand to make it look good, but actually everything ends up looking the same and good. And so you've got I think it's going to come full circle, and personalization is going to become a bigger deal. And it's personalization of what I do as a recruiter, so that candidates trust me to apply to jobs I've got. Personalization of what I do so that hiring managers trust me to work with me. And helping my candidates personalize and really show their personality so they can stand out to get the job that really is suitable for them, over and above these 36 other people that have identical looking CVs because everyone's chucked them through the same AI generator.
A great ending, I think. Thank you very much for joining me today, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.